Today I'm working on a 2010 Dodge Journey. I'm going to start by replacing both rear wheel bearings. They come as a pair. There is a left and a right on the rear. Up on front it's the same wheel bearing on the left and right side. I'm also going to be replacing the lower ball joints and the lower control arms and the tie rod ends up on the front end here, along with the wheel bearing just on this side because we replaced the one on the other side a few months ago. And the replacement of this wheel bearing on the front is just proactive. We figured, while we're at it, fixing this one back here that's making noise, we're just going to replace the one on the other side, and while we're at it we're just going to come up here and put a new one on here, and it'll have all new wheel bearings. Went with Detroit axle wheel bearing hubs. These two here, left and right, those are for the rear. I'm not sure which one at this point is on the left and which one is for the right, but then this one here is for the front. The difference here is this one is not going to come with this cable when I open up this box, and these two back here are going to have the cable, and most likely the difference between left and right just has something to do with where this cable gets connected or has to turn. Yeah, that don't sound too good. It's not as bad as the other side. It was hard to even turn, but this is really rough as well. Well, after quite a battle to get these darn lug nuts off, some gorilla with an impact gun must have put them on there, because I ended up with a 4-way lug wrench, my daughter out here holding the lug wrench steady, me on the end of it with a cheater bar. I actually took my propane torch and heated the lug nut up a little bit, because last thing I want to do is strip that off, because I'd be dead in the water. Once I got it off, I noticed that I basically can't turn this thing, but I think it's the park brake. There's a park brake cable here, and if you just push in on it slightly, you will not be able to turn this dang thing. I mean, it is solid. But if I just reach up here and I push that cable back, now it turns crappy, but at least I can turn it. So I'm pretty sure we got a bad wheel bearing here, pretty bad one. The pads are worn real even in there, which makes me think there's not a problem with this caliper, but we'll see. I'm just going to go ahead and take everything apart. Got the caliper pulled off and the pads removed. Obviously rubbing on the caliper there, but can you hear that? That's not a good sound for a wheel bearing hub.
This is a two-wheel drive, so you don't have any differential back here. So that's not a possible source of the noise, so it's definitely that wheel bearing over there. Now, because this is a two-wheel drive, there's no axle going in here. So you can see those 4 bolts back in there. And there's that round, it's just like a little plate. When you tap on it, it's just thin. But those are the 4 bolts that you're going to have to get out to get this wheel hub loose. You kind of need to get that caliper kind of tied up, mainly to get this emergency brake cable out of the way of one of the bolts that you got to get to in here. This brake line, the usual never hang your caliper on the brake line Almost doesn't apply here, but go ahead and tie it up. This caliper has got that kind of a piston, so you can't just compress it, you've got to turn it. So when you go to pry this caliper off of the rotor, you're just going to have to pry it up and off of there. You're not going to be able to compress it first. I always try and take a wire brush and get to those bolts the best I can. You know, spray them with some penetrating oil for what it's worth, get them ready to come off. But yeah, that's bad. Down in here is your wheel speed sensor. I've already taken off a little Allen head bolt that was in there. Once you do that, you can ding around on this a little bit and it should break loose and come on out of there. I'm not sure if it's necessary to remove that before you pull the hub off or not. I don't think so, but I just wanted to do it for the fun of it, to learn kind of how it feels to pull it out of there. In this case, the new wheel bearing hubs came with a new cable, so eventually you're just gonna work this cable all the way back to wherever it connects to at a plug, maybe up here, and install the entire new cable and wheel hub bearing assembly. I've got this caliper tied up pretty snug and pulled toward the front here, and that's got this emergency brake cable bent far enough up that I can get my socket straight on. One way or the other, you want to get that socket straight on. You don't want to fight this bolt at an angle fighting against that cable. Once you get that socket on there, first scrape around, get as much debris and rust out as you can around the bolt. Then work that socket on there, then take a hammer and tap it on a few times. Make sure you're fully seated with a 6-point socket. And then get on there, with a 1/2 inch long ratchet, and go at it. I've already got 3 of them loose. I was surprised, I shouldn't say this, how easy they were. So here's the last one. Okay, I'm real excited. All 4 of these bolts broke loose really easy. Now I do have this long 1/2 inch drive ratchet, but it really didn't take a lot of force, and all 4 of them came loose, so I'm really happy about that. That's a 16mm deep 6-point on a long 1/2 inch drive ratchet. What I'm going to do now, before I get these 4 bolts out, is I'm going to take a hammer. I'm going to drive one of these wheel studs out, and that's going to give me a hole here, and I'll be able to put a slide hammer in that hole and then work it around, clunk 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 clunk, to help pull that wheel bearing out. There's more than one way to skin this cat. Most of the time, once they get the bolts out, they just take an air chisel and they put it on here and they get it to spin. Once they get it to spin, then you can find your open spot over here where you can swing at it. But you got this dust shield in the way that keeps you from hitting on this side. So I thought a slide hammer would be pretty cool. It's probably not required that you take this out as long as your new one came with a new cable, but I just wanted to do it just for the fun of it to see how it went. But you know, basically it was a little bit stuck in there, so I got a screwdriver down in here and just kind of turned, and I got it to start to move. So now I'm just going to back and forth wiggle it a little bit. Eventually, after a few back and forths, that speed sensor should pull up and out of there.
I'm just working this thing back and forth with a screwdriver, spraying a little penetrating oil down in there, trying to get my screwdriver under that edge to get it to lift up. It's starting to wiggle back and forth easier now. As you can see, I've got this one stud out. I'm hoping that once I get that sensor out of there, that maybe this stud will be able to come out through that little hole there. The speed sensor does not want to come out of there. I'm still working on it. I'm just going to try and get it out of there, but I can see why they give you new ones, and I'm glad they did, because it would be easy to damage this one trying to get it out. Okay, after a lot of back and forth, some penetrating oil, getting a screwdriver wedged in there underneath it, prying up, it finally popped up. The good news is, once you get this brake sensor out of the way, you can shove that stud on through that hole and get it to fall out. So now I can get my homemade slide hammer in here. You could get a slide hammer that would actually screw onto these studs, which is super cool. You can get another attachment that just basically a fish hook that gets in behind here, and then you slide hammer it. But I'm going with a homemade slide hammer that I'm just going to put a 1/2 inch all thread through there, put a couple nuts or a nut in the back, and then got a homemade pipe, bam bam bam, to try and pull that hub off. Alright, went in, had some Wheaties. Let's see what I can do now. Well, I got that bad boy to come out of there. About the easiest I've ever had one come out. Not that it was in there loose, but the new tool that I fabricated myself. A homemade slide hammer. So there's a 1/2 inch piece of all thread held on by a couple of nuts. Pretty long piece of all thread, heavy piece of pipe. Bangs up against there, so I grab that pipe. Wham! 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 Then I can take that bearing and I can turn it, rotate that rod around a little bit. Bam! Bam! So you can apply pressure to any point you want. Once I got one corner to come out, I shoved a big pry bar back in that corner, moved my slide hammer over to the other side and gave it a couple whacks, and everything fell off here onto the ground. So this plate here was back in behind there, and the bolts, 4 bolts held it in. And then of course that bearing used to be inside of here. This plate goes on like that. There's a hole there for the speed sensor, dust shield, and then here's the bearing itself, was in there pretty much like that. But again, just nut there and a nut here on this side, and then like I say, you're able to turn this around. And so when you got this dust shield on here, when this thing's sitting in there like that, the only place you can smack it is right over here. So you're always just smacking on one corner. But when you apply this slide hammer, then you can apply smack pressure at any point in 360 degrees. Worked great. Now you're going to want to get some putty knives, clean this flat surface up, get some emery cloth, get this inside race cleaned up, then eventually we'll grease that, pull the new bearing in via the 4 bolts. We'll install the new speed sensor that comes already installed in the bearing. The speed sensor comes new with the new bearing. The hard part is taking this thing off in about 1,000,000 spots. There's a push clip here. It pops out of a little deal there. Goes on down here. Goes into a clip back there. Then comes around. Goes into another push thing here. And then plugs in right there. Speed sensor plug starts up here. There's a couple of clips that go in, so I just used my little pry tool, pried that out, and then you've got to push real hard on this plug back here. Push real hard back there and pull out, and this will come out. Little catch is up there, and when you push this down, it lifts that up and releases it. There's another holder that was connected to that line right there. Looks like if I get a small screwdriver and pry right in there, that'll open up, and I can get this to open up here. I can get that out and then reattach this to that line right here. They're just really not wanting this brake line to, go anywhere. Heck, there's a metal bracket back in here. That bolt right there in the middle, that bracket goes over here. There's another bracket down in on the other side here. There's this little booger there. And there's this little push pins here, and there's this one here, and that there. A lot of that stuff comes with the new hub. So on the rear, there is a left and a right. I've got to spend a little time figuring out what the difference is. Hopefully it's obvious, but I just wanted to show you here that this new hub does come with the wheel sensor. It's got that little push-in clip there. It's got that snap-on bracket. I think this one, there's maybe one right in here that might have to reuse. There's that. And then it comes with a new metal bracket here. Then it comes with a new metal bracket here. And then here's your connector. So I'm going to go after this flat surfaces first with a putty knife. I'll come back and rub them with some emery cloth. I'm going to try taking a wire brush, getting in here, cleaning this out, and then I'll probably come back with some emery cloth and kind of go around here by hand, get this nice and clean. I've already gone around a couple of times here. You really don't need to go all the way back, because that new hub's only going to go in here about 1/4, 3/8 of an inch, something like that, but you can get in here and get those surfaces nice and clean. Then we're going to grease them, and then we're going to stick that new wheel bearing hub in there and suck it in with the 4 bolts. Now once you've got that area nice and clean, nice flat surface here for the bearing face, Nice clean surface in here for that bearing to slip into. I'm going to go ahead and apply some grease in here and on this surface. Then we'll figure out which bearing goes here on the left driver's side. In some cases this dust shield will basically be disintegrated, but in this one's still pretty stiff, so you know, obviously we're going to reuse it, but if yours was rusted out, they do sell these. I've got the left and right wheel bearing hubs laid out here. These hubs do have the splines inside of them, so they would work with a four-wheel drive car. Ours is just two-wheel drive, so that's just an unnecessary function. So the left and the right appear to be identical as far as the hub bearing part. The difference is the cables. The brackets on these cables actually show left and right, and in one case there is an extra connector on the left, which is the driver's side. There is this connector here, which is not present over here on the right passenger side. They've even gone so far as to put a left on this bracket and a right on this bracket. So best I can tell, the only difference between these two hubs is the wheel sensor cables and where the brackets are located, how many there are, those kind of things. So the one with the 78, that's your left rear. The one with the 79, that's your right rear. So I've got this all cleaned out. I'm going to put some grease on here. I'm going to reinstall that piece, and I've taken my bolts over to the wire wheel and cleaned them up a little bit. So now we're ready to suck that bearing back into that mounting hole. Just take note of all your various mounting locations for the speed sensor cable as it goes through several different brackets and connectors and inserts. I've got this plate stuck on the outside, but I just wanted to show you that it only goes on there one way, so apparently there is an orientation here. Right now I've got the dust shield on, the wheel bearing hub just held in with snug bolts. You want to feed that brake cable through that slot ahead of time. And then what I'm going to do is I've still got the old brake cable on there, and I'm just going to kind of go holder by holder, taking the old one off, putting the new one in, all the way back up to this point. Now in the back I've got that plate on back there, and I showed you earlier that it appears that there is an orientation to this, but you know, you basically can't mess it up. For me, these 4 long bolts in here are 16 millimeter. I'm just going to go around kind of in a cross pattern, tighten them up evenly, and kind of suck that bearing into the hole. And then I'm going to snug them up to factory spec. I'm not even going to tell you what that might be, but for me it's about 30 foot-pounds. Man, I'm telling you, putting on this cable for the wheel speed sensor, that's one of the harder part of the job. You see there's this little bracket back in there. There's a tab that has to come through that hole. But first, there's actually a little bracket in behind there. You have to flip it up, get it out of the way, get the bracket that's on the cable in first, then flip it back down, and then put the bolt through both of them, so it's a little bit of a puzzle. You can move some things around, leave some things disconnected up here, get you a little more slack for this operation right here. Now on to this bracket back here. This one looks like it won't be so bad. One bolt there, little tab up top. Alright, that one's on. Now there's just one left here. This one here clamps to this line, and then all we do is take this and plug it in there till it snaps in. And then of course take these little connectors and shove them in those holes. We've got that wheel hub all torqued down and tight on there. The new speed sensor cable routed through the various millions of brackets and reconnected to its plug. Dust shield is on. We're ready to put things back together. I'm not going to show a lot of detail here because if you want to see that, just watch Brake Job for 2010 Dodge Journey, and it'll show you how to basically do the brake job. I'll probably try and turn that caliper in, one turn to give me a little space. I did want to show you on this bracket that holds the brake shoes, you got these caliper pins. They should move in nice and easy. We'll take these out and we'll grease them. But on this other side, I can't move this thing. So we're going to pry that out of there, clean it up, re-grease everything, clean this up, clean the hardware where the pads ride in there, and then we'll scuff the rotor up and put her back together. In this case we had a ton of pad on here, so I'm not going to put new ones on. Rotor looks good, so we're throwing her back together. Eventually I'll throw a little bit of grease or spray grease on that surface there to help keep that rotor from locking up on there for the next guy. Again, notice the hub does have the splines, but they serve no purpose. There's just a blank plate back in behind there. Here you've got the rotor. This was the outside. You're going to want to try and clean up this surface here a little bit. Got those surfaces cleaned up a little bit. Surface of the rotor roughed up a bit. It was kind of amazing. This one side, this pin was super free. This other side, I've been over here torquing on it with this, banging it with a small ball peen hammer. I finally, turned counterclockwise and kept constant outward pressure, and I got the pin to come out, but man, it was seized in there hard. Now you want to make sure you don't break this little rubber boot, so I'm going to take a screwdriver and pry this little rubber boot off right there, pull this pin out, see if we can save it by buffing it off on the grinding wheel, re-greasing it, putting it back together. Obviously we'll take this one out, grease it. Here's your brake hardware, 4 individual little pieces in there. We'll kind of clean those up with some brake clean, put everything back together. What kind of freaking gorilla put these lug nuts on there? They're supposed to be 19mm, but they're the ones that have kind of a shell over them. They're not a completely forged nut. So a 19 won't slip over there. I'm able to get a 3/4 inch 4-way lug wrench on there. I can also get a 20mm 6-point to slip over them, but it's a little loose. but I'm going to go with this because it fits the tightest. I put a little aluminum foil and took a torch to it. We've tried a couple times. This thing is tighter than tight. A little lower. Good gravies. Who would do something like that? That is insane. Good gosh. These lug nuts were crazy freaking tight. So this is a standard lug nut, but here the outside shell has come off. So here is one with the shell on there, but that outer shell is pretty easy to distort. I went to the auto parts store and I got these. These are forged. It's all one piece. These are the way to go. This is actually the passenger side, but I'm going to throw in a couple of things here that I left out when I did the driver's side. So the first part of this is basically like a brake job. So I just recommend you find a video on how to do a brake job, but basically you're going to remove these two, I think 13 millimeter caliper bolts, and then this caliper will get pry bar up in here, pry this caliper out, support it up here. This is a little different than usual, so I had a little piece of baling wire and pulled it way back out of the way. Once you get that off, then you got to take these two big bolts off that hold this caliper bracket on. Once you get that off, then you start banging around here on your rotor, and hopefully that rotor comes off fairly easy for you, and now you're to the point where you can see the wheel bearing. These little caliper bolts should not be that tight, but this one's super tight. I'm banging on it. I'm actually spinning the nut. So I have a set of kind of skinny wrenches. This is a 15 millimeter, and it slips on there, and you'll have to roll that around till it hits something or hold it while you're banging on that big ratchet to undo that little bitty bolt. Yeah, that thing was in there so freaking tight. I had my wrench holding that steady, had my big 1/2 inch drive ratchet on there. I couldn't believe how much force I was putting on it, and then of course it gave loose. So now that little bolt is busted off in the pin. We'll see how much trouble that causes me, but hopefully this other one comes off without so much trouble. Now this bracket with the pads in it will come up and out of there with just a little effort here to prying it out, and then once it pops out, set it off to the side. Get yourself a little piece of coat hanger, some wire, something like that. Tie it back up out of the way. Now you've got two 18 millimeter caliper bracket bolts, one below and one there that I'm on it. It's 18 millimeter that I've got on there. They're usually pretty tight, so you want to use a breaker bar or something pretty long. Get those off, then that whole bracket along with the pads will come out. Set it off to the side for now. Now most of the time this rotor is just not going to fall off there for you. This, unlike a Honda, does not have any little screws holding it on. It's just rust welded on there right now. So just, you know, carefully come in here and hit in between these studs. Then eventually you're going to want to get to where you can back here. Bang on that rotor. Turn it around a little bit. Work on that. Work on that. Spray yourself some rust penetrant down in these holes, maybe around in here. It'll eventually come off. Now I've already shown you the one on the driver's side. It was the one that was obviously making noise. I got it fixed. took it out for a test drive. At first I'm like, I'm kind of hearing that same dang noise. But then I'm driving it, I'm like, nah, it's way better. It's way better. But then I'm like, boy, I still hear that noise. Could it be that the other one is bad as well? Yeah, that doesn't sound too good. It's not as bad as the other side. It was hard to even turn, but this is really rough as well. Alright, now we're down to the fender. So there she is. Oops. God, that sounds horrible. That's terrible. Okay. Well, I'm glad we're changing this one too. So same thing. We're going to clean up these 4 bolts as they protrude here best we can. Then you reach around back and you get your 6-point socket on there. There's 4 bolts back there. You get those to break loose. Then we're going to knock one of these studs out. This is just the way I do it. Put my slide hammer on there. Alternately, you can come into this area and bang around. The problem is there that because of this dust shield, you can only get on this one corner. So you can kind of get this side to maybe eventually pop out, but then the other side doesn't want to pop out. So that's the nice thing about the slide hammer, is that you can roll it around and you can put pressure here, 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 and here, and eventually that bearing will just pop right out of there. If your new hub came with a new speed sensor with a cord and all that, there's really no need to have to take that out. If you want to just totally commit, just grab your snippers, cut that cable, and you can just leave that in there. It'll just come off with the hub. I went ahead and took the Allen screw out, wiggled that speed sensor out, get it out of the way, because I want to take one of these studs, and I already knocked this one loose. Boom, hit it a few times, it drives in there, and then it'll go right in this hole and come out. Now I've got a hole there for my slide hammer. Okay, yeah, this is redneck ingenuity at its finest here. Just go out and buy yourself a slide hammer. You know, it's like 80 bucks. Rent one at the parts store or whatever, but I threw one together out of some stuff I had laying around. Holy Toledos! You can see how fun that would be banging on that with a hammer. Now of course if you're in a shop, you get your impact hammer out, take a crack at it, get it spinning, then get your chisel down in there, start working it around on each edge. Alright, went in, had some Wheaties. Let's see what I can do now. Oh my gosh, she put up a fight. But probably about twice as much banging around as you saw me do on camera. Spraying some penetrating oil in there. I took a few smacks at it with my chisel and hammer. Squirted penetrating oil in from the back, in from the front, top, sides, anywhere I could think of. Finally saw a little crack, and after that, here she came out. Usually that dust shield just falls off. I'd probably be stuck on there too. We'll see how that goes. Get those all nice and cleaned up. As you could probably guess by how hard this thing came out, this one's got a lot of little crunchy stuff here, so it's kind of like cleaning the plaque off teeth or something. So make sure you check all up and around the top and get all those chunks off, wire brush it, get these surfaces nice and clean. We're going to clean that dust plate up, get ready to put it back together. On this caliper piston, there's a little groove right here. You need to have that straight down because it has to go over a little pin sticking out the back of that pad. Where's my frickin' finger at? Can you see that little pin?